This is the first time I actually have someone in the room who has a PhD. What is it about those early years, maybe the first, say, 10 years of our life? And how does that start to impact the long term game?
It's different for each person. And so if you're the person guiding the change, either for yourself or someone else, then the most important thing you can do is to be searching for the difference that makes the difference for them.
Let's do this, Josh. Let's make a promise to our listeners today that by the end of this conversation, if they continue to listen, we will help build a framework with them today. By the end of the conversation, they'll have some framework that they'll be able to put into practice if they want to change something about their life.
Okay. So first step, and so if you're looking for a framework, right? I think first step is
I think we've done about 14 episodes, and this is the first time I actually have someone in the room who has a PhD. So this will be a intellectually stimulating in a different way episode because all the other guests have been super amazing and we've enjoyed those conversations. But today we'll go a little bit more deeper into the neuroscience, into the science of what it takes to change, to be the best selves that we want to be, and see what emerges from the story of our guest today. Welcome, Josh. How are you?
Hi. Thank you. I'm doing very well. Great to see you. Great to be here.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And we've had many conversations in the past because you and I used to work together, but this is a different setting.
I was just going to ask, should we tell everybody that we know each other? Or? Right. Okay. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all out there in the world. So Josh and I worked together at Mentora for a few years. I think it was 3 or 4 years, Josh, till I left.
Like that. Yeah.
Something awesome. Looking forward to this hour that we have together. Josh, the first question we kind of start this podcast to run the guests through the memory lanes of wherever you have been. If that 8-year-old Josh, that little boy growing up, if that Josh were to come to you right now and you and he kind of face each other, what kind of a conversation do you think will emerge?
Well, I would be so curious to really try to understand how he's thinking and, what the world is like for him right now. And I think I would be much less likely than ever before in my life to try to change him. I think it would just be about, this amazing opportunity for me to I guess I'd be approaching it as though I'm in my own 50-year-old consciousness, But yeah, because I so many memories, I wanna know, like, what was it that motivated me? Why did I do that? Why did I then leave and feel embarrassed afterwards? Why did I not do this? Why did I restrict myself from certain friendships? Why did I avoid developing in certain ways but then spend a lot of time on other things? You know? So, yeah, trying to unpack what is that collection of feelings and beliefs and mindset and all that was his.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you use these words curious and then mindset. I'm curious. What do you think is and maybe you can relate it to your story and your growing up and what was it about your growing up that made you choose the career, the path, the life that you've chosen for yourself. But what is it about those early years, maybe the first, say, 10 years of our life? And how does that start to impact the long-term game?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that's challenging is that nobody will ever know for certain. And I say that because I think it's actually unknowable because there are too many variables. That said, there are certain things that seem to be the case across, development, like for all kids, at least within a certain culture, maybe at age 9, you start to see some early signs of hormonal shifts, right? Puberty's not happening, but you can expect there to be sort of these sudden bouts of irritability, right? So there's certain things that are developmentally happening on average, right, that most people are experiencing. You know, we know that people are capable of much greater self-control as they get older, right? And that continues on into throughout life, actually. Um, and some people have speculated that that's because the prefrontal cortex is, continuing to change in quite meaningful ways well into the 20s, right? Although the behavior continues to change, until, throughout life, the ability to control yourself. So there's got to be a lot more to it than just the brain changing. But yeah, those early years, what I think it boils down to is we come to form certain fundamental beliefs about who we are, about how the world works, about what's expected of us, what are appropriate ways to motivate ourselves, um, what our responsibilities are. Like these are the things where I believe parents can really make a big difference, right? And whether we feel that the burden is on us
Mm,
versus the responsibility is on us, or that we're protected. There's nuance to it, right? I think those things in those early years that are happening, and it's amazing. Like we can really get to a point where people can think, for example, that they don't like learning, which is for most people, it's this delightful thing that they'll discover later in life. But they can get to that point because they've had so many associations with, "Stop bothering me," or, and that get that message at home or at school, right? Or saying, "I'm really enjoying this," and other kids might tease them for it. And there could be plenty of pressures there, and people can really come to honestly believe that they have certain values and certain beliefs,
mm.
even though all of that can change. So, anyway, I don't know if that's where you were going with it, but that's, to my mind, I think some of the useful things to think about.
Yeah. No, the joy of this podcast is that we are not trying to go anywhere. Uh, trying to have an open conversation, which I'll
Great,
all,
I'm on board.
yeah, assimilate and summarize and try and bring it to our listeners' advantage, right? Because, and I always say this, Josh, that people should actually they can listen to certain podcasts on the go while they're in the gym, but this is not one of those. If they want to really get something out of this, they'll have to sit down with a diary because I have it in front of me, and that's the only way we'll get through this and get something out. So what you're saying is, and I see this a lot, Josh, that these early mindsets that get formed in children, and I come from a culture, India, where when I was growing up, the only few professions you could have was being a doctor, being an engineer, being maybe a lawyer if your parents are a little bit more advanced, but that's about it. And so I've seen coaches who've done really well in life who are now, say, at companies like Salesforce or Dropbox or the biggest tech companies of the world. And they still can't go and have a conversation with the manager because their parents said, do not raise your voice, do not conflict. If I'm saying something, that's it. You don't change. So how do you see that play out? How do you see that play out? Because there's no manual to parenting, right? There's no manual to leadership. So how does one grapple with these when their mindsets have been formed during that early age, and now they're adults, 25, 30, 35,
Mhm.
unable to change things?
So the context does make a big difference in people's willingness or the next step is let's identify, what are those pieces that might be getting in the way. And there's I've been doing this stuff for 25 years. One of the main reasons we wrote this book is to make it simple so that people who haven't been doing it for 25 years can just follow a few prompts. You can't read somebody else's mind. You can't guess, but you can have some good ideas and you can get curious. I want to find your truth. Knowing my truth is practically irrelevant here. What's true for you? Because my reality and your reality are not the same. Well, I mean, first of all, one thing that I like to do is I don't presume that they want to change or that it's best for them
Mm,
to change, right? So if it's somebody who is saying congruently that, yeah, if I this is something I really want to change, it's getting in my way, I at a minimum want to experiment with changing this. There's always some cost to a change, right? And so they've created this ecosystem they live in where it's adaptive in certain ways. It maintains the balance, and allows them to get a lot of what they want if they continue to act in this deferential way towards people who are, you know, higher up in whatever hierarchy that they've subscribed to, right? And, so first of all, there's that, like, would wanna explore that, and I think that's just one of many pieces. There's this kind of comes back to the central thesis of my book, which you will also hi, everyone, there's a book we're gonna chat about too. Um, but that so change can happen to a much greater degree than I think most people realize. Even if it's something you've been wanting to change forever and you didn't change or that you thought you couldn't change or that you have been making progress on, no matter what it is, whatever that relationship, it can happen to a much greater degree than most people, I think, are aware of. And what's key is that it's different for each person, which does make it complex, and it doesn't mean that there's a one size fits all, but it does mean that there is a solution. It's different for each person, and so if you're the person guiding the change, either for yourself or someone else, then the most important thing you can do is to be searching for the difference that makes the difference for them. So, is it that they have some way in which it's really serving them to behave in the old way? Well, maybe that works for them, but maybe there's a different way for them to get that need met that also allows them to change. If you don't address that, you're not gonna get the change. Maybe there's a belief in the way, some limiting belief that this isn't possible for me, or then I'd be a person I don't want to be, or I could never do that, or I don't know how to do that, or it would be risky, or could be that maybe that it brings up certain feelings. Maybe there's just there's so many different pieces that it could be, and so then kind of and of course in the book then it's well, how do you very quickly try to figure that out? How do you
Mhm.
try to understand what is going on in that person's mind? How are they approaching the situation? And then what are some of the things that might actually be the difference that makes the difference for them? And you can get there, and you can get there quickly, often, and you never know, you can't ever promise it's going to be quick, but it tends to be a lot quicker than other approaches.
Mm, got it. Got it. Yeah, so many questions arise. And by the way, to the listeners, Josh has very subtly named his book twice in the last few minutes. So the name of the book that's coming out soon is The Difference That Makes the Difference. And I've had the privilege of reading that book, Josh. So I'm gonna ponder upon those questions. Let's do this. Maybe we're 8 minutes into the conversation and we have started to speak about change and mindset. And I think at some level, there's a deep desire in high percentage of human beings wanting to change something about their life. But change also brings up fears. Change also brings up resistance. So let's do this, Josh. Let's make a promise to our listeners today that by the end of this conversation, if they continue to listen, we will help build a framework with them today, which you have not discussed. It's completely unscripted, where by the end of the conversation, they'll have some framework that they'll be able to put into practice if they want to change something about their life. Is that a promise too big?
Some framework,
Some
that's
framework.
probably something that we can arrive at, yeah, like
Yeah,
a few key steps to help them at least start to explore what those I mean, I've used the title of the book a few times because it's how I talk about it, but
yeah,
help
yeah.
identify what the difference is, it can
Absolutely.
make the difference.
Absolutely. So change, Josh. That's the big theme, right? Someone wants to go from A to B.
Mhm.
Or maybe not even someone wants to. Someone is at A and they don't know yet if they want to change themselves, if they want to change certain parts of themselves. How does one get to that state where they build the awareness that A or being like A is not serving me? What's the first step there, Josh?
Okay. So, first step and so if you're looking for a framework, right? I think first step is you identify 3 things. You identify or we can make these 3 steps. If that's better, but these are the 3 things, right? You identify your desired outcome, and you don't have to know exactly what it would be, but it's something which is not your present state. You describe your present state. Some people like to call that the problem.
Hmm.
Um, and then you start to explore what's stopping you from moving from your present state to your desired outcome.
Hmm.
So far, nothing like crazy to be said. However, in my experience, those 3 things are not clearly like delineated. Most people haven't actually sat down and really articulated okay, what's my desired outcome here and how would I describe my present state, and the things that are working for me and that aren't working for me and so forth. And certainly much less often, even if they've got those, have they then really explored the question, all right, what's stopping me? So that would be the starting point for
Got it.
me. Yeah.
Got it. So step one is to identify three parts. What's your desired outcome, your present state, and what are the obstacles that are stopping you right now?
Yeah.
Let's make it even simpler for our listeners. Imagine that the end goal, Josh, is
And I'd love
I'm
also for us to offer an example, and maybe this is where you're going right now, yeah, because it's
absolutely
already
100%.
already abstract, right?
So
Yeah.
exactly, I'm 200 pounds, and my That's my present state. I'm 200 pounds. I can lift some weight. I do some exercise, but there's resistance. My desired outcome is to be, by the end of 2025, be at, say, 160 pounds. I don't know if that's possible, but let's the desired can be anything, right? So the desired outcome is 160 pounds, but what comes in the way, and that's the obstacles, Josh. And you correct me if I'm not thinking in the right way about the obstacles. The first obstacle is that I love food.
Mhm.
And I have this association with food, that food is what brings you joy. So that's the first. Second is, I don't want to wake up every morning to exercise. Maybe some days, yes, but not regularly. That's number two. And my life is so busy. I have two kids. I have a full-time job. I have a podcast to record. And conditions apply. This is not me, please. I'm just role playing
Right.
this there. Uh, so three obstacles. I love food,
Made up.
completely made up. I am not able to exercise regularly, and life is too busy.
Mhm.
So now we have done this first introspection, and it'll be a little deeper. What's next, Josh?
Okay. And so in this case, you were able to have a very concrete definition of your desired outcome. Sometimes as people are just thinking, I want to make more money, or I want more freedom, or I can't stand having things be the same, right? And in which case, then there's a lot more to get to a desired outcome that can actually serve you, what we would call a well-formed outcome in NLP, and which stands for neuro-linguistic programming. If anybody just heard me quickly say NLP, we'll get more into that, or we can, or you can point you towards a resource. But uh, but you've got a desired outcome that sounds like you at least have a pretty clear sense of what it is. You know where you're going to, not just what you're running away from. So that's going to make it easier. I don't know if that's something that you feel like is within your control. But that'd be something important to explore when we have a goal that's not within our control. Like I want to, get this sale. Well, that depends on the other person. That's not in your control. There are things that are within your control that will move you there, but that's not, right?
Mm,
So we want to explore those criteria. You know, is it every context where you want to be, doing this? When it's something about your weight, well, you're probably showing up with that weight in every context. But maybe not. Maybe it's, on vacations, I don't wanna care, or,
mm,
you know, I s or maybe this is just for a time and I wanna make weight for, for my wedding for photos, and then it's right. So the context does make a big difference in people's willingness or and then, is it ecological? So,
mm.
meaning, if you think of like an ecosystem, what are the other things that'll push back? From what you've said, my guess is in this case, you've got other things that would be unacceptable to you somehow that push back. Given the ways that you currently have thought of for how to get from 200 to 160, again, a hypothetical situation, then there are three things that you identified that you would expect would really just not be okay with you.
Mm,
Right? It wouldn't be okay to lose this relationship with food, this joy of eating, right? It wouldn't be okay to spend the time that you think it would take to get all the way to 160. And then there was a third thing you said, and I'm forgetting what it was.
that life is busy.
Life is busy, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the sacrifice in terms of other things, the work or the kids or the, travel, I don't know, whatever it is not acceptable to you, right?
Mm,
So it's possible that there's this internal resistance, this internal conflict as a result. So these would be where the next step is, let's identify, what are those pieces that might be getting in the way. And there's a lot here, and I will admit that what I'm sharing, there's a lot of complexity to this. I've been doing this stuff for 25 years. That's one of the main reasons we wrote this book, is to make it simple so that people who haven't been doing it for 25 years can just follow a few prompts, right?
mm,
And get there.
mm.
So, so there's a chapter that takes you through those 5 criteria of making sure that your desired outcome is a well-formed outcome. That's going to remove or reduce a lot of resistance. Well, in this case, since it seemed like you were really nodding when I was saying there's some internal conflict, it wouldn't be okay with you. Let's just take one of them, to change your relationship with food, right? To give up that love of that food, right? And right now you don't see an alternative to that
Right.
to get there.
Right.
So here's the second piece. If you encounter resistance, so let's assume that people are doing this first step, maybe they're also able then to look at, so they've got the desired outcome, the present state, and the what's stopping me from moving from one to the other. And, and some of the listeners might say, "Oh, I like this well-formed outcome idea. I'm gonna check those 5 criteria too." But even if you haven't done that, if you're getting a sense there's some resistance, some kind of internal resistance, then the next step, I would say, is let's explore. And you'll hear me use language like explore and get curious and so forth, because with the complexity of a human mind, it's never always the same way. You can't read somebody else's mind. You can't guess, but you can have some good ideas and you can get curious. And as long as you stay open, as long as you have this attitude that I'm exploring and I'm getting curious about it, you're more likely to make sure that you don't get too attached to any one idea. Because what you're finding is the truth for that person. I wanna find your truth.
Yeah.
Knowing my truth is practically irrelevant here.
Mm,
What's true for you? Because my reality and your reality are not the same, and people don't respond to reality. We can't even know reality, it's too complex, but we respond to our versions of reality, our
mhm.
set of beliefs and understanding of what the world is and how it works and so forth. So what's your reality? So that's what I wanna stay open to. So within that, then, if there's resistance, then I can explore what is that. And part of it is just kind of asking this question, what's stopping you? We got somewhere. And then I wanna kind of explore. I'll give the question to ask first, and then we can get more into why. How is that serving you? And you could just pause and reflect on that right now, because it sounded like, whether or not this is a real example for you, I think you're saying there is a real love of food and it's, gets in the, so how is that serving you to have this love of food,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah. So I'll make it into two parts. First, I'll respond to the question as we're role playing this because that's going to help me and also listeners understand. So this love for food, as I'm reflecting upon it, and I'm reflecting on my week. For this week, maybe 4 days, I was able to control what I wanted to eat. And by Friday, when maybe my willpower has reduced because I've had a busy week, by Friday, I'm like, what the hell? I'm not going to eat clean. I've had enough salads. It's not giving me joy because joy comes from love for food, which comes from a butter chicken masala, which comes from something like a pizza maybe. And that's what I want. And that's what happens where to feed my emotional need, I incline upon food. So that's what's coming up for me, Josh. And I'll pause it before you respond to it. Because for the listeners, I think what Josh is first of all, this is like $1,000 coaching session. So make good use of it. That's what we do for a living. So the first step was identify what is it that you want to change, the present state, the desired outcome, and what's stopping you. So we did that. Then we moved to this idea that when you move from A to B, or when you have the desire of moving from A to B, the obstacles are stopping you, but you have to understand where is that resistance coming from. And a good way, Josh, what you were saying was there were two questions you spoke about. A, what is getting in the way, which helps any individual explore the resistance. And this is very well applicable to changing a job. This is applicable to asking for a raise. This is applicable to if you're a business owner and you want to go for that first sale, you want to go for that. It applies to everywhere. So
How
what is getting in
does
the
it serve
way?
you to not ask for the job? How does it serve you to be afraid of picking up the phone, right? That's a question to honestly ask
Yeah.
and presume that there is an answer, that it is actually serving you in some way.
Hmm.
Not just to try to shut it up and say, "Oh, it's a terrible thing. I just have to kill that part of myself." Well, that part of yourself is there, right? And you can't,
Right.
it's a part of you,
Yeah.
and it's there for a reason. And so let's find out.
Yeah. So how is that serving you? And that reflection will allow you to understand, do you want to stay in that current state, or is there a deeper desire to change? Is where we are at, Josh. Does that summarize well of what we spoke?
It could have that effect that you're already at a point where you're saying, "You know what? Yeah, there's a cost to doing this, but I have an even deeper desire to change, and maybe that's enough. Maybe it's just a cost benefit of the internal struggle, and
Hmm.
that could be the outcome, but that's not necessarily the outcome at this point." At this point, I would say we're discovering what we would call the positive intention behind the resistance. And this is sometimes a tough pill for people to swallow, that every behavior has a positive intention. And you might think, yeah, what about the bully at my kid's school, right? How is that positively intended? Well, a bully is often bullying someone because they want to feel powerful or they want acceptance from other bullies, or they want to, prove to themselves that they can't be pushed around. Well, wanting to feel powerful, wanting acceptance, wanting to prove to yourself that you can't be pushed around, those are positive intentions. It's a bad way to go about it, and it often leads to the exact opposite outcome of what they desire, but it's a positive intention. So we're finding the positive intention, and you may end up saying, okay, now that I know the positive intention, I really think that is the best way for me to serve that positive intention, and it's a very important one to me. Or you might say, you know what? It's possible there are other ways to serve that positive intention that would also allow me to change. And so as you're getting in touch with this positive intention, when you've asked this question, which comes up when you say, how is that serving you? So when you're getting in touch with this positive intention, Utkarsh, from in the role play here, where you're saying, well, that's where joy comes from in life,
Mm.
right? And I'm not willing, I don't want to live life without joy. And this is a huge part of where joy comes from. So you have this, it's serving you because it's helping to make sure you have joy in your life, right? And so you're not going to make this big change, this drastic change you're talking about. And by the way, you're always free to change the desired outcome. You could say
Mm.
180, right? I mean, whatever. Maybe there is a different desired outcome that actually serves everything. I don't know. But you are not going to, in my opinion, you are not going to make this change until you find at least one way where making the change will enable you to have joy in your life.
Mm.
At least as much joy. And maybe there's a particular quality of joy you're looking for. Maybe it's not just any joy,
Yeah.
And so a question you can ask, here's another one. How will reducing your weight, and maybe it's 160, maybe you're already shifting the goal a little bit, I don't know, but how will reducing your weight enable you to have more of the kind of joy you're looking for in your life? So the abstract version of that is, how will working towards the goal actually help you achieve more of the positive intention?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm reflecting upon this. Fascinating, because what you're doing here is helping me replace this joy that I was getting with food to now with the desired outcome that I have. How will that give me that joy is what we're doing.
That is the question, yeah.
And why this is very relatable, Josh, because I've gone through this journey over the last 12 months. So in 2024 early, I was actually whatever the weight that we were speaking about, not the numbers. And what I think I realized through that journey, and that's why this becomes a very powerful approach to make this help listeners also shift things about themselves, is because I started to think that if I'm able to be at a certain weight, I'll be able to run faster. I'll be able to play better. I'll be able to engage better with my children who are now growing up, who want to play basketball, but I don't have the energy to do that. Now, is the joy of the food bigger than joy that I get to play with them? The answer was that it was the latter. And so for me to get that joy of playing with them, it is important for me to shift this relationship with food and thus, in a way, overcome the obstacles. The pop psychology kind of a term, like find your
Right.
why and then the rest follows.
A really important piece of the puzzle. And another way of getting there, instead of how is that serving you, is to say, why is that important to you? And my guess is that for a lot of people, it will help advance them towards the change they want.
100%. I contemplate a lot on this and I'm unable to yet figure out why can all of us be high performers?
Well, we all can't be relatively high. We all have these ideas or beliefs, conscious or unconscious, about that, like, well, I can never do that. And so we're inviting people to go ahead and really explore this question, why not me, right? And the reason is,
Hmm.
and that might be the difference that makes the difference for you, serving that joy in a different way, maybe even getting to greater joy. Somebody else might have had a different reaction. They might have taken the question and attached different things to it in their mind. They might have said, no, that particular joy is important. They may have come up with some creative solution where they thought, well, actually, if I've lost the weight, I can actually then really enjoy it without any internal struggle, but just less frequently. There's just so many ways that the question can be answered. And notice that I didn't offer anything about the specifics.
Hmm.
I just gave you the form of the question and you filled it all in.
Yeah, powerful, powerful. And once we have reached this space where maybe I've discovered that my joy could be now shifted and be more in line with my desired outcome, what's the next step to getting to that change, Josh?
Well, here we're going down kind of a speculative road of like, well, what would it be for you, right? And so it may be that at that point, that's everything, you're done, right? And it may be that you find there's other points of resistance. Okay, but what about this? The time
Mm,
that it takes. Or it could be that there's now you need to kind of learn how to really do it. How would I be that person? Right? And and so here we have to kind of like it really does depend on the individual's path, what they need to change.
mm,
Um and because we spoke about resistance, I would say if there's another form of resistance or there's another element of resistance within this food piece, you just repeat the process,
mm,
right? So let's say that we get to a point where it's like, okay, I don't, oh, a third option is I don't believe. I can see that, but I don't really believe I can do that.
mm.
That's
Right.
not me. Other people maybe have done it, but not me. Right.
Mm,
And so are we going to want to then work on a belief change?
mm,
Or you might be saying, I don't know how to do this. So are we going to want to work on some kind of capability or skill change? Right. And for you, or there are others too, but just if we start with those two options, either of those kind of ring true for you in this case, that maybe it's about, I don't really believe that that's the case, or I don't believe I could do that, or is it more like, I don't know how this actually happens, or
yeah. Yeah, I think where I'm getting with this ad is, and as I'm thinking about my situation plus beyond, I think when that shift happens where you can find joy in something else that is in line with your desired outcome, it's almost like finding that why, right? The
Mm.
pop psychology kind of a term, right? Find your why, and then the rest follows. So it's almost that we're trying to get the coach or the user or me in this case to that state where I understand what my why is behind that weight loss, and if that why becomes really clear, then the capability problem or the time problem, I'll be able to solve those problems if that desire is really strong. Does that make sense, Josh?
Yes, yes, that you probably will be able to solve those problems. It's often a really important piece of the puzzle.
Mm,
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes people are perfectly in tune with it, with their why, and there's something else in the way. But it's often an important piece of the puzzle, and it's certainly worth exploring. And I think it very much is analogous to that why that you're talking about. And another way of getting there, instead of how is that serving you, is to say why is that important to you?
mm,
And then yeah, and so, why is that important to you? And then you can once you get an answer, you can even take it another step and say, "Why is that important to you?" That answer, and why is and so you can really get to, somebody's motivating values or even identity, which is, will influence everything about what they're doing.
yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I love the framework that we have given, and it's a rough framework. They'll have to go through a book and maybe reach out to either one of us to do this in a better and deeper way.
But
But
at
for
the
Indian,
same time, hopefully it's something where they can listen on just the podcast and say, "Okay, I'm gonna ask myself these questions in this, series, right, in this direct like, steps, and see what happens." And my guess is that for a lot of people, it will help advance them towards the change they want.
100%. I 100% agree with that. So to summarize, and then we'll shift our attention to something else, is that A, identify and define the present state and the desired outcome. Explore your obstacles. Once you have the obstacles listed, then look at like where is that resistance coming from. And you also spoke about Josh having a well-formed outcome. I think that's going to be important. Once that is all present, then you create that the ecosystem is what you start to speak about, the context and what your personal perception is to that situation. Once you've started to define that, then the question that Josh you gave us was, what is getting in the way, or how is that serving you? And once that gives you clarity about the intention that you have, then you move into asking, how will doing this bring more joy in your life or whatever that relationship is where you're going? And then it forms the action and the accountability and that step. Does that
Yes,
right?
yes, and if we also just for the listener's sake, if we strip it down to just the actions for them to take, I think what you gave is the actions plus the explanations,
Mm,
then it would be, "What's my desired outcome?" what's my present state? And by the way, present state can include those things external to you, but also internal, your thoughts, your feelings, your capabilities. And then what's stopping me from moving from the present state to the desired outcome? Then we take something from that, what's stopping you, um, and explore how is that serving you right now, that presuming it is serving you in some way. Or we can say, why is that important to you to do that, right? Once we've got that, then we've identified that important thing or that positive intention, right? That value, your why, however you want to frame it. And we can say, how can you get more of that by making this change you're trying to make? So that if we just strip it down to the steps without the theory behind it, and without the explanations, those would be, I think, the steps we've gone through.
Perfect. Perfect. Now, through all of this, Josh, here's me playing the devil's advocate. We can give everyone the framework. We can try and support. We can try and support ourselves, others through this change game that we are trying to play here, right? But then there's this section of your book which I really love, where you share these 8 principles of being limitless, if I remember the word correctly.
Mhm.
I want to go through them one by one and take maybe a couple of minutes on each one of them, because, and maybe even before that, as I'm thinking through this, change is still hard. You can have all the frameworks, you can have everything that you need, but being consistent, trying to change things about yourself, trying to feel that I'm limitless, does not come naturally to everyone. What's your understanding of this? Because I contemplate a lot on this and I'm unable to yet figure out why can't all of us be high performers?
Well, we all can't be relatively high performers because if everybody's high, you can't have everyone above average. So if we're compared to each other, but that's just a technical definition. But yes, why can't we all be high performers? I I think we all can be higher performers than we are. Um, and I think in general, that's actually the trajectory that people take in life. There's some things where we might get sort of calcified in some maladaptive way of doing things, but there's other areas of our lives. I've yet to meet a person who hasn't grown in some useful way in some area of their life, as life has gone on. Maybe for somebody, it's becoming more compassionate. Maybe for somebody else, it's learning to stand up for themselves. But you'll see changes. So it's inevitable that we do change. So yes, change is hard, and yes, it's inevitable that we change. And in fact, you couldn't stay the same if you wanted to. So so there's this paradox here, right? That both of those things are happening. Maybe it has to do with this. I'm pretty sure there's research on this, but I would have to kind of dig into it to see what there really is. But I'm pretty sure I've come across this kind of thing where that people have this relatively stable image of themselves from the past. But in fact, they have changed on any objective measure quite a bit in many ways, personality, capabilities, so forth. But that aside, you're really more core to the message here, though, to the point is, it's hard, even if you know this stuff. And I would agree that, also, can we all be, that person who's always feeling limitless? So I'll address those separately. So it is hard, often. And at the same time, you've had experiences in your life, correct me if I'm wrong, where all of a sudden one day, it could have been something you've wanted to change forever. All of a sudden one day, you were like, oh yeah, I'm going to behave differently with my kids that way. Or I'm going to actually move to Australia. Or I'm going to, like do this project that I haven't done. Why haven't I done it? I don't know. Or I'm going to actually reach out and start calling people who from my past, right? All of a sudden one day, that kind of thing does happen and will make a change. And maybe it's because of talking to a friend and the way they frame something, or maybe it's seeing some example, or maybe, you know, the, but it does happen where we will suddenly make a change and it will be forever. And, changing a way of eating or changing an exercise routine. I've done that instantly and forever a couple of times. And it's like, but there's other things I haven't changed after years of wanting to. So we all, I think, have that experience where some changes are very hard and stubborn, and some are instant and lasting, and some are instant and not lasting, right? And sometimes the ones that are instant were stubborn and for a long time and then suddenly changed. I know that I used to hate writing. I did not like it. It was a struggle. I did not enjoy writing. And this is, into my 30s.
Hmm.
And then I changed my approach to writing, and I really enjoy writing now. And I've written 2 books, and they're doing well. The one we're talking about it hasn't even come out yet, and we've already got a couple of translation deals and an audio deal, and like we're got good pre-sales and like you know that's great. And my last book was translated into 10. It's in 10 languages. It's like it's sold. It was an international bestseller. It still sells. Like I've written a bunch of articles, and I enjoy it. And it's not a drain for me either. I don't. It's not a difficult process. I don't have any kind of nice discipline about it. You know, I do flip open the laptop and write for 10 minutes here and there. Like that's my relationship with it, and it's because of some changes I made literally one day. Um,
Yeah.
so so it can happen. And so really, if it can happen, and if I'm right that we all have some experiences in our life where this kind of thing has happened, then it must be possible. And so it's like, well, what is that? What's that difference? And then we're talking health changes or, work changes or personal changes or relationship change, like any kinds of changes except for stuff that just like there's physical limitations to, you know. But like but apart from that, there's quite a lot. Now, now to answer the second question, I'm someone who regularly does not wake up just feeling limitless and feeling
Mm.
joy the instant I wake up. I have to work at it. And I'll sometimes forget to. And then I'll take some pieces of advice, things I've learned from others, or a person thinking about a person like you. You seem to be actually one of those people who, from the outside, appears like you do just wake up more positive than most people. But I know I can get there
Mm.
when I remind myself of certain things, or change my focus or, just quickly. Lately for me, there's been with the new book and then with the business expanding, I've got like, I'm feeling like there's just so much, it's hard to track, right? And I'm just confused. And there's all these little pieces. And it's all stuff where I have to do a lot of things, but there's no immediate like way for me to know, did that work? Did that not work? I'm writing things and putting pieces out and marketing. And so I'll often wake up in recent months with these kinds of feelings. But I have some tools that I know to do, and then I'll get to it sometime within a few minutes to 5 hours from when I wake up where I reset. And and a lot of times I simply remind myself of some of these beliefs that you talked about in the first part of the book. Other times, I'll, look at a quote from somebody who has influenced me before, like Albert Ellis, or actually Tony Robbins had something just yesterday that was really useful for me. But, just something that's going to help me often. Right now, the thing for me is to focus on the present and to think about what I want to create in this world.
Mm.
That for me is hugely important because I've done the big picture thinking. There's no way to know which one small thing is actually gonna make the difference today. There's other times when that is the key thing I need to do is to figure out what's the most important and focus on it. Right now, that's not. And
Mm.
and so focusing on the present and what I really want to create in this world, what kinds of messages do I wanna get out there? That's the thing for me right now. But this'll 6 months from now, it'll be a different issue that I wake up with, a different form of indigestion, right? And then so I'm not one of those people that just naturally wakes up feeling unlimited, but I
Mm.
frequently get there. Most days, I will have some time when I do get myself there, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah. Love that. Yes. I'll respond to everything and then I'll assimilate everything. So one thing, yeah, sometimes I feel like there's something wrong with my wiring, but I think I've just programmed myself to be this way, Josh, that I actually wake up thinking limitless. I mean, you're right in identifying that, but I, on the other hand, would also share that it has come from a level of awareness because there are days when I procrastinate like anything on starting something. And then I pause and reflect, like, what the hell is happening with Kush? And I realize that there's some anxiety associated with that thing or some other thing that pushes me. Like, for example, starting this podcast, Josh, I knew that I want to have these conversations, deeper conversations, thoughtful conversations, wherever they lead to, right? And there's no immediate outcome. Like I'm not getting like $1,000 out of a podcast, or I'm getting like 1 million views every podcast. But someday I might. So I procrastinated, and my conscious procrastinating, Josh, how it happened was I selected Marshall Goldsmith, that he will be the first episode, else I'll not start a podcast. And then I gave myself a second option as well, that there's a coach called Elisa Cohen. She's a coach in the US, and she's someone I admire and loved her books. So she'll be the second person. I started emailing Marshall in 2024 January. And every month I'll send an email. He connected me to the PR team. He connected me to the podcast team. But never did they agree to a date. And which I understand. He's a busy man. He's 75 years old, doing beautiful work in the world still. And so for me, it was like, he'll never say yes. I'll never have to start a podcast. And then I started to look at Alisa and then started to reach out to her. And she said yes. And I'm like, part of me was like, damn, there's going to be a lot of work now because I have to start a podcast.
Uh-huh.
But then that's the emotional roller coaster that I go through every day. But what you're saying, Josh, ultimately to summarize, is that we all naturally go through change. And I think what is really important, Josh, what you said is, which people should identify and look at, is that change will happen around different aspects of you. It's not necessary that all of them will change in one go, but some of them are changing. And if
Mhm.
you are able to identify that, then change becomes natural, change becomes normal in a way. And this whole idea of, again, coming from social media, from to make this pill look hard to swallow. Oh, change is hard. Oh, change is unnatural. Oh, change is leading to conflict. I think that is also playing in our minds, Josh, because that's associated the word change with kind of a negative connotation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, it's also such yes, so negative connotation, and it's also what we would call it in NLP, a nominalization, meaning
Mm.
a verb that's been turned into a noun. And so we act as though it's this thing, right? And you can't do anything, and but it's not a real thing, and you can't really picture what's changed. And so it just sits there, and it has a sense associated with it, like it's hard, which we hear frequently, largely because writers, I think, want to try to meet their audience where they are, and so they say, like, "We feel you. We feel your pain. Change is hard," right? I mean, someone who's feeling like it's easy at the moment is not reading the article, right? So so you want meet them where they are. So, yes, that is kind of a meme, change is hard, and I think it gets out there. It's also this abstract concept. One thing that NLP encourages people to do is to take nominalizations, verbs that have been turned into nouns, and turn them back into verbs. It makes them easier to deal with because it's an act, changing. What are you changing? How specifically are you changing? Or how specifically are you not changing? Right? And it's never a static thing. It's a process. It's not an all or nothing thing. And I think that helps you kind of see that, and also implies there are things we're doing to not change, right?
Mhm.
You can't just not change. You can't just have it happen to you.
Yeah.
Like there are things you're doing to not change.
That-
So that's another piece I think is useful. But you know, for both of those reasons, it just being this abstract thing, it's like, "Oh, what are you talking about? Change, right? You're selling change." What? It's like when people say they're selling solutions. It's just like, this is like, did you really just waste my time with that sentence, right? You know, and then of course here I am someone who does that also, but I get it. I have the same reaction. So it's abstract and it has I think there often is this negativity to it, but then other times it's excitement, People just have different relationships with change, and it will depend on which change. You know? It's like somebody can be super excited about career change and absolutely not want any changes in their home life.
Yeah, yeah. So many variables there are to any journey that we'll ever take as human beings. And I think one thing that you said, I just want to kind of build upon that, is that we don't even know if all of this is real. It's all our perception of the reality that we call the reality. So sometimes I feel like the world is nothing but 8 billion perceptions, each one trying that my perception is better or stronger than yours. It's a fascinating world. I don't want to have this podcast end without mentioning the eight principles, Josh. And maybe we'll speak about one or two of them. So I'll kind of quickly go through
I
them.
thought it was ambitious to go through each one.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I
I
did.
agree with that. I
Yeah.
agree with that. Maybe I'll pick up one so that the listeners can pick up the book to read all eight. But with the one that I deeply resonate with is the second one, where the title is "Why Not Me."
Mhm.
And then I think something that we spoke about already is assuming good intentions, that even something like bullying can have a good intention behind it because they're trying that. Am I understanding it correctly, Josh? So that's one.
Mhm.
But yeah, what does it mean by saying why not me? Can you explain that in a little bit of detail?
Yeah. So, I think most people will have had that experience. I wish I could do this thing. Other people can do it. Someone else can do it, but I could never be that person on stage with 10,000 people showing up and paying like whatever to show up. Or I could never be the one who actually gets promoted to, chief financial officer, or at least not at a big company. We all have these ideas or beliefs, conscious or unconscious, about that, like, well, I could never do that. And plenty of people have talked about the imposter syndrome, that we don't really believe that in our, even when we're getting there, that we really belong. And so we're inviting people to go ahead and really explore this question, why not me? Right. And the reason is that this kind of underlying belief behind it is that if someone else in the world can do something, then I can too. Now, there's a way of hearing that where before you've read the book, where it might just say like, okay, let's try to pump ourselves up. It's like, it's all like, why not? Why not me? Right. There's more specific reason that this belief exists and why we're, encouraging people to take it on as one of their foundational presuppositions in anything they do. Which, by the way, you often need to remind yourself of. Like, I need to remind myself of it, when I'm stuck. I'm like, oh, yeah, let me think about that one for a little bit. All right. So the reason why anyone can do something if someone else has is because we can learn from their mental model, from the way that they think about reality. And there's things that we can borrow from that. Now, of course, there are some specific limitations of like, if I am not a citizen of certain countries there, and then if there's a law saying that a non-citizen can't be president, I can't be president of that country, right? So yes, of course there are some, but for when we're talking about most of the changes people want to make that have to do with, relationships, work, health and so forth, which are generally the categories that capture everything. Whether it's for yourself or in an interpersonal thing, people are operating according to their version of reality, what we would call their mental model, right?
Mm.
And it's like a model train set, that's a model of it. It's not the actual territory. It's not the real train. It's not like a map that you might use when you visit a city. It doesn't have everything on the map. It doesn't have the culture. It doesn't have the flavors of the foods. It doesn't have even every street, right? Or every store. But it generally shows you where to go and how to find things. It's got a lot of information. We never have a complete map or a complete model of the world, but we have a model of the world. And so that's why right in the beginning, when I was saying, well, what's true for you versus what's true for me, let's all try to take on this attitude that let's presume that something is true for someone else that may not be true for me. And it is actually their truth. And so what are the components then of a mental model? So there's a lot that we can learn. And in the book, there's, after these 8 beliefs, there's all these specific tools, like another 20 chapters of like specific tools for how do you unpack what somebody's mental model is, and then how do
Right.
you help to shift that or to take it on for yourself. But some quick things that you can start to look for
Mhm.
are, how do they think about themselves as a person in this particular context? So if we go back to the example of shifting your eating, if you know somebody else who has dropped from, that percentage, what,
Mm.
20% of their weight, right?
Right.
In a healthy way, then, how do they think of themselves, right? What is important to them? You talked about this joy of being with the family. Are there other things that are important to them? Like what is meaningful to them about making that shift? What are they capable of? What are their skills as pertains to doing this? Does it have to do with just willpower, or is it something else? Like they know how to have a good time with salad, right? Or they know how to choose restaurants, or they know how to throw dinner parties in a way that's, it's like, I don't know what their skills are,
Mm.
but what are they, right? And so identity and values and skills, and there may be certain beliefs they have, about the way things work and what will happen or what will people think, or they may have certain skills pertaining to what they do if it goes wrong, or behaviors like, well, what do you do if you've just been like 3 weeks and you have just been failing for the last 3 weeks and it starts to feel hopeless? Well, maybe they have a strategy for that.
Correct.
Maybe they've been there. And so it's like, and how do they even engage when they sit down with the food? Like, what
Mhm.
is the pace at which they eat? How do they prepare the
Mm.
table? Like all these things. These are all things you can unpack.
Yeah.
Right? And there's much more, but that's just like starting with what we call the logical levels, the identity, values, beliefs, capabilities, behaviors, environment. So, there's lots of ways to explore that stuff in the ways people talk, as you get into it, you can learn to spot certain things and ask questions, but even if you're just going in and you're thinking about those things
Mm,
and you're just getting curious about it, you'll discover something of value. And even if you're just imagining the other person's, like, logical levels, you'll still it's still useful even if you're wrong,
mm,
because you will expand your mental model. You will
mm.
you will discover options, usually. If
Yeah,
you can check in with them, you'll discover different options,
different.
right? Maybe they'll be more useful, maybe not, right? And you don't have to take it on wholesale, but it's about discovering something that's different that makes a difference for you,
Yeah,
right? And that's
love that.
that's really the key.
Love that. The difference that makes the difference for you. As we go through this change journey, Josh, over our lifetimes, we started with that 8-year-old little boy, Josh, who was building these curious models and mindsets and what led to what. If we now go into the future, Josh, and you're 80 years old, if that 80-year-old Josh were to now appear in front of you and give you one advice for how to lead the rest of your life, what would that advice be?
Oh my god, you know what? Now I have this great idea that I wanna do. I'll just take the perspective of my 80-year-old self and try to really understand my 50-year-old mental model of a number of different things. It'd be a fun exercise and interesting. Now, in terms of advice, I mean, there's one piece of advice that I currently like to give, so I assume that in the future I will also. But but in the future, I'll probably have some different advice that I wanna give. But this is one of the chapters actually that you were referring to in those 8 beliefs, but if I knew then what I knew then, right?
Mm,
Which is essentially about the idea that, we talk about, if I knew then what I know now, right, I'd do it all differently. Well, no, actually, one of these NLP beliefs is that everybody behaves in the best way they know how, given their current mental model of the situation, right? If you knew then what you knew then, you would do it all the same. So cut yourself some slack. Like just have a little more self-compassion. Life, you are evolving, you have reasons for why you're doing things. You actually are making good choices given your mental model. And yeah, you can change your mental model. Keep growing, keep exploring, and you're more likely to keep growing and exploring if you stop beating yourself up about how you used to be. Like if I get punished for changing because I'm going to beat myself up every time I learn something new and I'm now embarrassed, am I more likely to change? I think I'm more likely to run away from it. I don't want to deal with that guy, that jerk who's going to keep on punishing me, my future self.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's a shift I wanna make, and I'm still working on it, but I'm much better at it than I used to be.
Yeah. We're all work in progress. And I love this. It's such a simple yet provocative advice. Cut yourself some slack. It's okay for what you're doing right now. You're doing well. Whatever you're doing is based on the mental model that you have right now. And what I also love, and I think is
And whether you're doing well or not, cut yourself some slack.
absolutely, absolutely. Whatever you're doing for that, cut yourself some slack. But what I really loved also, Josh, and I think this is a fitting end to our conversation, is that when you have a desired state and a current state. So I'm where I'm right now. If I have to go to my kid's basketball game at 11 a.m., I will put that in my GPS. So I need to know the location of where I need to be able to chart the path through Google Maps. But as I do that, if I take a wrong turn, the GPS does not get angry at me, which is what you've shared in the book. The GPS changes the route and tells me another route to get to that position. So whatever you're going through your life, enjoy that moment. Josh told us to be present. I think that's really important. And that 8-year-old will very soon turn to that 8-year-old. They'll both meet each other through the 50-year-old Josh. And I think it's a journey worth taking.
I love it.
Beautiful. Thank you for being here. Loved this 1 hour and the conversation we had, and looking forward to many more. We'll put all the links to the book, to Josh's website, to everything in the show notes. So go ahead and click on them and catch. The first book was 2 awesome hours, Josh.
The
Do,
fir
do it.
first book was 2 Awesome Hours, and I've said my book a number of times, but I have a co-author also who was absolutely critical to making it what it is. And so Greg Prasmushkin, so it's, Josh and Greg's book. The first book was just me, 2 Awesome Hours.
Perfect, perfect. So we'll put all the links here, and thank you, Josh. Have a beautiful weekend. And those who are watching this on YouTube, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe, because that's how we beat the algorithm to get this to more and more people. And if you were listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a review to the episode and share it with someone who might enjoy this episode.
It was really nice to spend this time with you. Great to see you again. Thanks.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Ignite Neurons podcast. If you found value in this, here's what I recommend. Take out a paper or a diary and just put down one thing that you can change about your life because you listen to this podcast. I'd really appreciate if you could share that in the comments below, because I'd love to see how it's impacting you or not. If you're on YouTube and watching this, then like, share, and subscribe, and please make this wisdom go viral. And if you're someone who loves your podcast on the go, then Spotify and Apple Podcasts are your go-to places, or wherever you're listening to this, just like, share it with a friend, and leave a comment, because I'd love to engage, love to have a conversation with you. Until next time, till we meet again, keep those neurons ignited, stay curious, keep learning, be someone who embraces a growth mindset, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.